Hello everyone. In today's video, we are going to talk all about correlation rules in IBM QRadar. Now, using rules, you can implement different use cases that you might have. For example, let's say you want to get alerted whenever a particular user, let's say named as Bob, logs into a particular machine. You want an email alert to be sent out or an offense to be generated. Using rules, you can implement such use cases. Now, rules, they generally tend to generate offenses. For example, in the screen that is being shared, you guys can see all the different offenses that have been fired on this machine. Yes, the offense are of similar type, but if you see the offense source, they are all different. Why is it so? We'll talk about those as well in this video. Now, whenever we are talking about rules in QRadar, out of the box, there are hundreds of rules that are present, as well as we publish rules as part of our content pack, which are present, which are available on our QRadar App Store, as well as through the different apps that are published over there as well. You do get updated rules. Now, in QRadar, there are four different types of rules. They are event rule, flow rule, common rule, and offense rule. There is also another type of rule, which is a completely different set, which are known as ADE-based rules or anomaly detection-based rules. That's something that we will cover in our next video. In this video, we will cover all these four different type of rules that you can create in IBM QRadar. The first one is event rule, second flow rule, common rule, and offense rule. Now, as the name signifies, you can understand that whenever I'm talking about event rule, it means that the input to this rule would be an event. If you want the input to be packets of data in the form of flow records, then you would want to create flow rules. If you want to monitor or look at events as well as flows, then that's where you're going to create common rule. Well, the difference between event rule, flow rule, and common rule is in the type of filters. The filters that are available in event rule and flow rule are different. Of course, they will be different because we are looking at events in one case and flows in another case. Now, that being said, if I'm looking at common rule, in case of common rule, it will contain those filters which are common across event rules as well as flow rules. What are those filters? We will look into them in few minutes. And offense rule, as the name signifies, offense rule, in case of offense rule, the input is an offense. We'll talk about some use cases as well in this video around that. Now, first, let's look at event rule. Now, as you can see from my screen, the moment you go to Offense tab and over there on the left side, you have the rule section. You click on that, and that's where all your rules start populating. Now, over there, what I did was I simply clicked on the actions and then clicked on New Event Rule. This page opens up. You see all these parameters here. These are the ones that I was referring to as filters. Suppose, let's say, I want to know if the event's source port, all right, or let's say port is 22, or rather a specific port, as well as if the source IP is a specific IP. How can I create such a rule? Well, let's first put in a rule name that we'll create here. Let's say it's test _123. You can put in any name. And I said the first thing that I'll monitor is whether the source port, right? A source port is 22. So I selected this option, which says when the source port is one of the following ports. I selected this, and here I can put in the port number, which in my case, in this use case that I'm looking at, the port number will be 22. Again, I can select other filters as well. I mean, there are loads and loads of filters which are present here, and based on these, you can create your specific rules. So I selected 22 based on the use case that I just now talked about, and then the other filter that I had to look at was if the source IP is a specific IP. So, let's select an IP, source IP, and I will put in an IP address, let's say, which says, how does 0.0.0.0 sound? Let's use that. So I'm going to put in 0.0.0.0. I'm going to add that here and I click on submit. Now this rule that I created, this will look at, I'm going to say all the events that are flowing in. In real time, it's going to see if there is in any event where the source port is 22 and where the source IP is one of this, that is 0.0.0.0. That means any event where the source port is 22 and the source IP is 0.0.0.0, this rule will match. Of course, there are, as I was saying, there are other parameters, there are other filter parameters as well. I mean, so I can even look at this. I can even put in one more parameter here, which says when the event payload contains this string, this will match for the existence of a specific string in the complete event payload. Just a small tip, using this filter might impact the performance of your rules engine. So just keep that in mind. If you at all are you want to use this specific one where the event payload contains the string, you should put in more filters before using this option. So I'm going to just quickly remove this and there you go. So the use case that I said was if the source IP address, source port is 22 and if the source IP is 0000, then this rule should match. So I've created that. I click on next. Now, once I do that, in the next page that pops up, I have to define or I have to decide the rule actions and the rule response. Now, what is rule action, rule response? I'm going to say, think about you want that whenever this rule gets triggered, the severity, credibility, relevance values, which in turn determine the magnitude of the offense that is generated, you want them to be changed. You can change by defining the associative parameter under rule action. I can change, suppose for example, I can increase the severity of that event by 2, let's say. I can change the credibility, I can increase it or set to a particular value. Similarly for the relevance as well. Now, if I want to generate an offense, well, I'm just going to increase the severity, that's about it. If I want to generate an offense over here, I'm going to click ensure the detected event is part of an offense. I want to index this offense based on source IP. Fair enough. I do have other options as well to index an offense. I want to annotate the offense. I can select annotation. I can bypass this event. And under rule response, there are other responses that you can configure as well. For example, you want to dispatch a new event. You want to send out an email alert. Let's say you want to send out an email alert. You have to put in the email addresses and you're good to go. An email alert would be sent out whenever this rule matches. There are other options as well. I mean, say you can execute custom action. You can add them to a reference set. A lot of other actions which we will talk in our later videos. Now, one interesting thing that I wanted to quickly cover here is this dispatch new event. Now, what this means is when this rule matches, a new event would be generated by our QRadar's rules engine and sent back into the event pipeline. I can configure or I can define the event name for that new dispatched event. So let's say I'm going to put in the event name as test underscore 123, and I can put in a description blah, blah, blah. I can set the dispatched event severity, SRC values, severity, relevance, and credibility values. I can select the high level category, low level category as well. And I can also select this checkbox which says ensure the dispatched event is part of an offense. This means this dispatched event will in turn trigger an offense. Will it trigger a new offense? No, not exactly. Why? Because the index over here is based on source IP. Here as well, I've selected the same index point. That's why it will be, this event will be tagged to the same offense. Again, this indexing parameter, if you select something else over here, there is a chance that it will generate a new offense based on the index parameter that you select. Here I've selected source IP in both the cases, so we are good. Now this feature allows you to rename an offense as well. If you see over here, I'm highlighting that part which says offense naming. Using this option, that is, you're dispatching a new event and you're ensuring that the dispatched event is part of an offense. This is capable of renaming the offense as well. If I select this option, this information should contribute to the name of the associated offense. I can even set or replace the name of the associated offense to what I have said over here, which is test 1, 2, 3. I can even say, no, hang on, let this event be attached to that offense, but don't rename that offense. Let that uh, offense be named as its original name. Do not rename it. If I want to rename it, then I'll just set this option which is set to replace the name of the offense. So rather than the offense showing up with its original name, it will show up as test underscore 123. So in that way, you can do offense renaming as well. Again, we will talk about offense renaming in our later videos. Now, as I said, under the rule response, there are other options as well. You can select response limiter and then finally enable rule. Now keep in mind one thing, guys, that this rule response page under which you have the rule action and the rule response, this is common across all the four different type of rules that we are looking at. All the four different type of correlation rules that we are looking at. Those are event rule, flow rule, common rule, and offense rule. In all the four cases, this rule response page is the same. Just keep that in mind. Now, this was all about your event rule. I'm not going to click on finish because I don't want a new rule to be created. This is just for testing purpose. So I've clicked cancel and I've exited the rule wizard. Now, if I want to create a flow rule, what do? I simply click on actions and then click on new flow rule. So once I click on that, the rule wizard again opens up. And as I told you guys before, right in the beginning of this video, when we are creating flow rule, we want to monitor packets of data which are flowing in as flow records. Again, this was something that was covered in our previous videos wherein we talked about different type of flow records that can be generated. So we've got internal flows which are generated by QRadar's flow collector or QNI based on where it has been, it has been connected to the span or the tap port of a switch, or we are also capable of collecting third-party flows as well. Let's say flows being generated by different third-party sources in the form of N flow, J flow, S flow. We are capable of processing that. If you want to create rules based on those flow records, or rather, you want to create rules which will monitor those flow records, then you would want to create flow rules. Uh, I'll give you a simple use case. Let's say again, the source port is 22. How about that? The source port is 22. So I'm going to click on this over here, this filter ports. I'm going to again enter 22. Now keep in mind, there's one small thing that I wanted to mention here. If you have realized this by now, this source port is one of the following ports. This was the same filter that was present while we created the event rule, right? Well, logically it is correct, right? You say this filter, you say whether it's flow record or events, you should be able to specifically look for specific source ports. That's why this is a common filter. And because it's a common filter, when we look at common rules, you will see this filter present. So if I'm going to select 22 here and click on add, click on submit, you see this filter is present. But if I look at event payload, right? I was looking at payload, event payload. Do you have that event payload here? No. Why? Do you have that? Nah. Why? Because I'm creating a flow rule. I'm looking at flow records. Flow records do not have event payload. They would have source payload or destination payload, not event payload. So that's why that event payload, if I'm searching for that filter, that shows up as blank. But if I'm going to search for just payload, of course, you do have that. You have when the source payload matches this regex string. That is, it's looking at the it's looking at the payload that's present in your flow record. Of course, I can select source or destination here. I've selected source. I'm say by default it's source. I can select destination, and then it will look for the existence of a matching string that you'll define in this regex. It will look for a matching string in the source or destination payload, whatever you put in. Like for example, I've now put in a destination payload. Let me put in a rule name here, test 1, 2. How does that sound? Test 1, 2. And I'm basically looking at, in this use case, if the source port is 22 and if the destination payload contains a specific regex string. I'm not entering the regex string, but you can define it. If I click on next, it will show up a warning saying that, hang on, this is a wrong rule because you haven't yet defined this regex string. So I'll just remove that because anyways, regex, writing regex is something that will be covered later. Now, coming back to this. So when the source port is one of the following 22. So what happened is in this rule, I'll just see if there are any flow records where the source port is 22. If I click on next, you will see the exact same page that we had seen for event rule. That is your rule responses. And rule responses and rule actions again is something that we have covered previously. So I'm not going to go into the details, but you can again set the SRC values, that is severity, relevance, credibility, which in turn define the magnitude. You can send out email alerts, you can dispatch new event, you can generate offenses, similar thing. So that was about my flow rule. Now, what is common rule? The common rule, as I had mentioned before, common rules look at events as well as flow records. That means only the filters which are common across event rule and flow rule, only those will be present here. Again, that means only those filters, like we already did find one filter, right? Which was present in case of event as well as flow. That's the source port. That will for sure be here. But will it have event payload? No. Will it have source payload? No, not exactly. Let's in fact do that. How about we look at port? We just do a port, and as I mentioned previously, you see that the source, that same filter is present. The source port is one of the following ports. I'll put in a rule response, let's say, sorry, rule name rather, test underscore 1, 2, 3, 4. Just putting in a name, or it can be anything. When the source port is one of the following. As I said, this is a common filter which is present across events as well as flows. And that's why you see this here. Will it have the event payload filter? Don't think so. There you go. It's not there because that particular filter which says event payload contains blah, blah, blah. That filter is applicable only for events. It's not applicable for flows, flow records. That's why you won't have it here. Similarly, any flow specific filter, you would not have them. If you're looking at my payload thing, the source of the destination payload, you won't have those. But you would for sure have options which talks about common filters, filters which are common across events as well as flows. Those filters would be present in case of common rule. Again, I click on next, and once I do that, again the same rule response and the rule action page is same. Oops, it just threw me an error. Why did that error come up? The reason for that is this. I did not select the port that I need to here. So this is something to keep in mind. If there is any incomplete filter parameter present, it will throw an error. So I'm going to select 22. I'm going to click on add. I'm going to click on submit. Now, once I do that, I click on next. Now it should go through. And yeah, there you go. Now, as I said before, the rule response and the rule action page are pretty similar. So I'm not going into the details of those. They're pretty similar. We've already covered them in the earlier part of this video. I'm going to click on cancel. And next, we are going to look at the fourth type of rule, which is offense rule. Now for that, you click on, for creating a new offense rule, you click on new offense rule. Now this is interesting. Unlike event rule, which look at events as its input, or flow rule, which look at flows, or common rule, which can look at both events and flows, offense rules input is another offense. That means, let's say you want to trigger an email alert whenever offenses are generated after business hours, or they are generated on weekends. You want to send out an email alert. In that case, you will create your normal event or flow or common rule. Also, together with that, you will create an offense rule. Now, what this offense rule will do is match or look at that specific condition that you said. If there are offenses that got generated over the weekend, or if they are generated after business hours. So that if that's my use case, let's say I'm going to put in a rule name here, test underscore offense rule, test underscore offense rule. And I've selected this filter parameter which says when the offense occur in any of these days of this week. I need to define this. So these days of the week, as I said, I'm looking at offenses which got triggered on the weekend. Weekend is Sunday and Saturday. So I'm going to add those. I'm going to click on submit. This rule, this is an example of an offense rule. This rule will trigger whenever any offense gets generated over the weekend, that is Saturday or Sunday. There are, of course, other filter parameters as well that you can create here, that you can use here. But if you see, all of them are specific to offenses. Some look at offense severity, credibility, relevance, log shows that detected the offense, offense context. Everything is, all the filter parameters present here are related to offenses. I click on next, and my rule action, rule response page opens up. If we see over here, there is a subtle difference between the rule response rule action page that we are seeing for our event rule, flow rule, or common rule. In case of offense rule, the options here are different. Why? Don't I want to set the SRC values again, severity, relevance, and credibility? Yes, you would want to, but you can set the SRC values for an event, for a flow record. You can't set the SRC value for an offense, because offense, the how critical an offense is, that is determined by its magnitude, and magnitude is in turn dependent on the SRC values of the event. So in a way, that's why you cannot set the SRC value of an offense, and that's why you don't have that option here. The options that are present here is if you want to annotate that offense, you want to put an offense name, and as a rule response, you have limited options, which is email, send to local syslog, or send to forwarding destinations. You don't have the option of generating or dispatching a new event and in turn generating an offense. That doesn't make sense, because this rule, the input is already an offense. As a response to this rule, you would want to then take actions based on the fact that the input was an offense. So that's why you see limited options under the rule action and rule response page. Over here, again, you can set up rule response limiter, and that's about it. Once you click on finish, the rule gets saved and starts getting executed. So with that, we come to the end of this video. In our next video, we will talk all about our ADE based rules, which are anomaly detection engine rules, wherein we'll talk about threshold rules, behavioral rules, and anomaly based rules. Thank you.